This week's module examines the executive branch of California's government. This video reinforces and builds upon your reading in Democracy in California. The executive branch is that part of government which is responsible for implementing or carrying out the laws that have been passed by the legislative branch. Laws as passed by the legislature are something of a blueprint. They can prohibit certain types of activity, or they can establish new programs to try to solve social problems, but it's the executive branch that gives these laws real-world effect by carrying out the law on a day-to-day basis. California's executive branch is made up of a vast array of different agencies, boards, and commissions. And these organizations employ over 300,000 people in the state. Most of these employees are civil servants, meaning that they're career government workers who are hired on the basis of their technical expertise to perform a specialized function within a government agency. They hold these jobs without consideration of partisan politics. This bureaucratic form of organization of California's executive branch is a result of reforms that were implemented during the Progressive Era. If you think back to our module on the Progressive Era, you might recall that one of the major elements of the progressive movement was the elimination of the spoils system. Under that system, government jobs were treated as a sort of bounty to be enjoyed by the political party in power at any given time. Government workers were given their jobs on the basis of partisan loyalty and were expected to perform their official functions in ways that served their party's interests. One of the major accomplishments of progressives like Governor Hiram Johnson was to replace that corrupt system with the more rational system of government employment that we have today. To lead this immense organization of executive branch agencies and workers, the state constitution provides for several separately elected officers. This means California has what's called a plural executive, in which the responsibility for managing the executive branch is shared by different officials. These officials are the governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, secretary of state, treasurer, controller, superintendent of public instruction, and the insurance commissioner. This structural feature of California's executive branch distinguishes it from the federal model, in which the president is the only elected official of the executive branch of the United States government. While each of these officials has important responsibilities, it is the governor who is the most important executive branch official. California's Constitution declares that the supreme executive power of the state is vested in the governor. The governor shall see that the law is faithfully executed. This constitutional wording hints at a bit of a dilemma for all governors of the state. It's expected that the buck stops with them. Whenever there's an issue with how the state government is operating, people look to the governor to handle the situation. But despite the constitutional language regarding supreme executive power, in reality there are many limitations on how the governor can exercise that power, as we'll see in greater detail shortly. Governors are elected to 4-year terms. California's gubernatorial elections overlap with federal midterm elections, so they occur in even-numbered years in the middle of a president's term. Governors are limited to 2 terms in office, although that limitation was put into effect after Jerry Brown served his first 2 terms, which is what allowed him to serve another 2 terms in recent years. The California Constitution gives the governor a number of formal powers. The appointment power allows the governor to appoint top-level managers to many executive branch agencies and commissions, as well as judges to the state court system. This is an important power because it allows the governor to choose people who share the governor's philosophy and priorities to lead the management of government agencies. The governor also has the power of the veto to prevent bills passed by the state legislature from becoming law. This power allows the governor to strike down bills he or she disagrees with, but it also gives the governor leverage in the legislative process because the threat of a veto gives legislators a strong incentive to shape bills in ways that will win the governor's approval. The governor is also given the power to propose a budget to the legislature each year. In doing this, executive branch agencies submit budget requests for the upcoming year to the governor's office. The governor chooses to adjust those requests, either up or down, to reflect the governor's priorities. The governor is required to report to the state legislature annually on the state of the state. This has evolved into a yearly ceremonial speech, much like the president gives the State of the Union speech. The governor's speech, which comes at the beginning of each year's legislative session, is a prime opportunity to offer legislative recommendations, the things the governor would like to see the legislature focus on in the coming year. Additionally, the governor acts as Commander-in-Chief of the California National Guard, deploying the Guard in cases of natural disasters or civil disturbances, and the governor has the power to pardon people convicted of state crimes. While those formal powers do give the governor substantial ability to manage the executive branch and play a role in the legislative process, there are important limitations on the governor's powers. For instance, California's adoption of the plural executive model means that important portions of the executive branch are led by other elected officials. The State Department of Education is led by the Superintendent of Public Instruction, an official who is elected directly by the voters of California. This means that the leader of the state agency in charge of implementing education policy in the state does not owe his or her job to the governor, and may not even share the governor's priorities regarding education policy. This limits the ability of the governor to shape implementation of education policy in the state. Likewise, many important portions of the executive branch are led by independent boards and commissions. The commissioners who lead these organizations are generally appointed by the governor, but for fixed terms, often beyond the term of the governor who appointed them. And once appointed, they cannot be fired. This means that when a new governor comes in, these boards and commissions are run by people who were appointed by the governor's predecessors in office, limiting the power of the governor to control how these commissions do their business. For example, in the first year of Gavin Newsom's governorship, PG&E's implementation of power shutdowns to avoid sparking wildfires erupted into a major controversy in the state. Governor Newsom very vocally condemned PG&E and called for investigations and reforms. But the part of the executive branch with the greatest authority to regulate the activities of PG&E is the California Public Utilities Commission, a commission in which a majority of the members were appointed by Governor Brown. This puts limits on Governor Newsom's formal powers to force changes on PG&E. Similarly, the state's universities, through the UC and CSU systems, are governed by trustees who serve for set terms and are not directly accountable to the governor. Yet another major area of state government where the governor's formal powers to shape executive branch management are limited. Beyond the leadership of these boards and commissions, the vast workforce that carries out the functions of these organizations is protected by civil service rules, meaning, for instance, the governor has no power to hire and fire the vast majority of people who work for the state of California. All these limitations mean that the bureaucracy of the state is very difficult for the governor to manage effectively. And finally, while the governor does have the power to submit a budget and recommend legislation, it's ultimately up to the state legislature to pass the budget and other laws. They take the governor's recommendations into consideration, but legislators have their own priorities, and they carry out their lawmaking function mostly independently of the governor. So California governors are in a bit of a pickle. Their formal powers don't fully match up to people's expectations that they should be able to lead the state. However, the governor has certain informal powers at his or her disposal that can help to steer the state government and politics in ways the governor would like to see. The governor is the single most identifiable person within state government and is given far more media attention than anyone else within the system. This gives the governor a unique public platform from which to mobilize support for his or her initiatives. Additionally, because of their predominant position within state government, governors have the power of persuasion, the power to convince others within the system that it's in their best interest to go along with what the governor wants. Political scientist J. Theodore Agneson and his colleagues wrote about the governor that more important than formal powers are political skills and an ability to bargain, a long political memory, and friends and allies in important positions. It's undoubtedly true that governors' success or failure is largely determined through their public communication strategies, as well as through their behind-the-scenes interactions with key players in the political system. It's tricky, though, to systematically evaluate individual governors on their skill at utilizing these informal powers, because it's so dependent upon the subjective judgments of the evaluator. One person's inspiring public leader is another person's grandstander. One person's effective bargainer is another person's sellout. But with these limitations in mind, I've still assigned supplemental articles for you to read for this module that do attempt to evaluate Governors Newsom and Brown on these somewhat subjective grounds. And I'm doing so because it's impossible to have a full understanding of the governor's job and performance without knowing something about how he or she wields these informal powers. I hope that you'll flesh out your own impressions from the readings in this week's discussion board and journal.